You know it's this. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look at better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the third part of What If Deku Enters DanMachi. Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of ArgonautStrike on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Izuku slowly opened his eyes and saw the bright light of an indoor roof. As his eyes adjusted to the light his vision was blurry. In his blurry worldview, he saw silver hair swaying. Seer. The light flowing locks reminded him of a friend of his. Not quite. A mature and clearly older voice. You're growing fantastically. I cannot wait to see how far you will go. She followed up with, Izuku felt slightly uneasy hearing those words. It's just a matter of time before I take you as my own. So show me how far you will go. He watched the silver hair get further away until it turned a corner and disappeared. Izuku felt like his eyelids became like metal and they shut closed as he fell back into his sleep. Once again he slowly opened his eyes, his vision no longer blurry. He looked forward and saw black hair lying on the bed he was currently on. He quickly recognized the hair as his friend Yaoyorozu, who was asleep on his legs. Something about her felt so calming to him, he wanted this to go on forever. But time keeps moving forward. Midoriya. The familiar voice of his usually uptight classmate broke his trance on the girl. Ida. Izuku looked up and saw two more of his classmates standing in front of him watching him. Ida looked like he always did while Todoroki had a weird grin on his face. Something about it sent a chill down Izuku's spine. I'm so glad you're okay. Ida shouted at Izuku. Yaoyorozu's head shot up like a bullet. Ida's shout had woken her up. She looked around for a second completely dazed by where she was before her eyes landed on Izuku. Once again she grabbed him and pulled him into a hug. Izuku was about to hug her back before he looked forward and saw Todoroki's face. Somehow the grin was much wider and actually scared Izuku while looking at him. What was wrong with his classmate? Yaoyorozu squeezed a bit more and Izuku felt pain rush through his left arm. He jolted back away from the girl who immediately realized what she did. I'm sorry. She shouted as she let go of Izuku, it's fine, just my shoulder still hurts a bit. As it should. The roar came from behind Ida and Todoroki. There stood a rather tiny person with gray hair. Clearly, she was annoyed about something. Take a look at your shoulder. She followed up, her voice getting calmer when she said that. Izuku pushed the small cloth off his left shoulder and saw a massive scar claiming his upper shoulder. The cut itself shouldn't have been that big, but the damage combined with the fact he had used Argonaut through that same arm increased the area that the scar had grown to. I'm sorry. Ida shouted as he bowed toward the teen. That scar is my fault, I shouldn't have tried to fight him in the first place. This entire thing falls solely on my shoulders. Ida said, tears bursting at the edge of his eyes. The mood dropped. It's okay, Ida. I knew the risk of using Argonaut through my arm, but I did it anyway. Plus I got this scar helping someone, so I don't regret it at all. Izuku smiled as he looked at the boy. Ida looked up and met his eyes. A friendship had bloomed. The teens then spent the next few minutes talking and laughing about a lot of things they didn't get the chance to talk about before. Then the door swung open and in walked a dog man with Manuel and Ace just behind him. I'm glad to see you're awake, Midoriya and Yaoyorozu. Ace said first before anyone else. But before we can talk about what happened, you have a visitor. Please meet Tsurigami Kenji, Poil's chief of Hosu. Quite the rough night you had. A man with the head of a dog walked in. Rough? All the students thought in unison. So the ones who took down the hero killer really are UA students. Honestly, I didn't believe it at first, but here you are. It's a shame he managed to get away. On the topic of the hero killer, he received a massive amount of damage from broken bones to cuts in multiple different places. His tone switched to one much more serious. As you should know, using your quirks to cause harm and injury to someone else without a license is a massive violation of many laws, so you three and your teachers shall be punished for these crimes. At least that's what should happen. However, I'm fully willing to cover this up so that these punishments will not happen. Though that's up to you. Personally, I don't want anyone tearing down you hero hopefuls. Izuku, Ida, and Yaoyorozu listened to the man's words. Not a single one of them spoke up. Todoroki clearly looked angry but was keeping out of it as it had nothing to do with him. We accept. Izuku said, speaking for all his friends. I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one that never wants to hear the name hero killer ever again. Though I do want to ask, how do you know he got broken bones from the fight? Educated guess. We had a look at the area where you fought him. That crater in the building gives away a lot of information. So what's the cover-up then? Todoroki asked. It was the sword princess who fought him, but ultimately he managed to get away. Wait, isn't that dragging Ace's name through the mud instead? Yaoyorozu spoke up. Clearly she didn't want Ace's name to be ruined. I was the one that suggested it. They all turned to the blonde woman who was as stoic as ever. A lot more people saw me in the area, and it makes the most sense to say that a top hero fought him. Don't worry, I'll change it a little bit to make a story that keeps Ace's name clear. They all looked at the dog man, who then pointed at Izuku. You got that scar from the fight, so we'll say you were there and got hurt, and then Ace prioritized saving you over stopping the hero killer. As a hero should. The dog man then quickly said his goodbye, wanting to let the students get as much rest as possible. A silence fell over the room as none of the students involved in the fight knew what to say to their teachers. Tension filled the room until one of the students spoke up. I'm sorry. Ida said, bowing toward Manuel. I shouldn't have run away, I understand that now. A slight impact hit Ida on the back of his head. It's fine as long as you learnt your lesson. Izuku and Yaoyorozu turned to Ace and were about to do the same, but Ace placed her hand up and stopped the two. There's no need to apologize. You saved someone and that's enough for me. Ace's normally stoic face had a slight smile on it. Clearly, she was rather proud of her two students. Once you can move without too much pain, we'll head back to the agency. But do be warned, your training is going to get a lot worse. Chills ran down Izuku and Yaoyorozu's spine at those words. Todoroki noticed that and wondered what was so bad about training. The sun was setting and Izuku could now actually stand up. However, actually using his left arm was completely out of the option as the amount of pain he felt was immense. Izuku walked out of the hospital with Yaoyorozu beside him, who had de-iced not to let him go by himself out of worry. Ida had gone back to Manuel's agency already and Todoroki went back to his house. Izuku and Yaoyorozu were going around to Izuku's house to let his mom know he was okay now. She had been blowing up his phone since last night wondering if he was okay or not. The travel was fast as Muzutafu was rather close to Hosu. They both walked up the stairs. Izuku almost fell down at one point but was caught by Yaoyorozu. Yaoyorozu was now very happy that she went along with Izuku. They got to Izuku's floor and stepped toward the door. It was now that both teens realized something. For Izuku, this was the first time Izuku was going to have a girl in his house, and for Yaoyorozu this was going to be the first time inside a boy's house. Both teens tensed up but neither noticed the other one tensing. I'm home. He shouted inward toward his mother, who should have been somewhere around the apartment. Yaoyorozu looked around and thought about how warm and comfy this was compared to her own house where her parents are almost never around due to work issues. The sounds of something crashing filled the hallway, then came a lot of footsteps that seemed to be picking up speed. Until at last a small green-haired woman came running around the corner, her speed comparable to that of Ace herself. She made a beeline for Izuku but stopped when she looked past him and saw Yaoyorozu standing there. Her body became like that of a statue upon seeing the young woman in her house. I remember you. Inko shouted while pointing at Yaoyorozu, who simply smiled at the mother. Izuku had told her that his mom is a bit eccentric at times. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Midoriya. Yaoyorozu stepped forward and bowed. I'm Momo Yaoyorozu, a friend of your son. A smile was on her face with every word she said. Inko felt her heart clench as she looked at the teen, then out of nowhere tears shot out of her eyes like a pressurized water hose. My Izuku brought home a girl. Inko shouted while looking at Yaoyorozu like she was a godsend. Izuku stepped past his mother and further into the house. Just ignore her when she's like this, he said, clearly used to dealing with the woman. Yaoyorozu gave a light chuckle as she stepped past the woman. The two sat down on the couch as Izuku went and tried to get some tea but got stopped by Yaoyorozu, who didn't want him to push himself. The two sat in silence for a second before Inko, who had regained her composure, walked over slowly. The three talked for a little bit before Inko finally asked the question she had been dying to all day. How are you feeling, honey? She looked toward Izuku. Better than I was, my shoulder still hurts when I use my arm, but that's about it, he explained. Inko didn't know about the scar and Izuku wanted to keep it that way. He didn't want to see her face when she sees it, so he decided to keep it hidden. Yaoyorozu looked around for a second before her eyes landed on a picture of a man with a big beard and gray hair. Is that your dad? She asked, noticing that his father seemed to be missing. This picture was the only one that had someone that wasn't either Izuku or Inko. No, that's my granddad. I spent a lot of time with him when I was younger. Hell, he taught me what a hero should be. He passed away a few years back. I still miss him. Izuku remembered the man, the one who had saved him. The one who told him the words which allowed him to stand despite the words of that man. Just from the way Izuku talked about his granddad made it clear how much he cared for the man. Yaoyorozu would be lying if she said she wasn't envious of him for having someone so close. Izuku looked at the time and remembered that he had one more place to go before heading back to Ace's agency. Sorry, but I need to head to the cafe before I head back to Ace, Izuku said as he got up and gave his mum a hug. Yaoyorozu got up to follow Izuku as he walked out of the room toward the exit. But she was stopped by Inko, who grabbed onto her arm. Please keep an eye on him, she asked Yaoyorozu. The girl smiled back at the woman. Of course. They made their exits and went back down the stairs before they arrived at the bottom and began walking in the direction of the downtown area. It was now fully dark out, the street's lamps being the only source of light out, and the sounds of bustling bars nearby was the only thing they could hear. It was rather calming. They turned a corner and made their way to a bar at the side of a main street. Yaoyorozu looked up at the sign and saw the name, Hostess of FRTLTY. Izuku took a step in. Yaoyorozu quickly followed. Hey, Seer Green Hair's here. A girl with black hair. Looking around, there appeared to be three of her waiting different tables. Two doors in the back swung open to reveal a girl with gray, almost silver hair and gray eyes. Izuku, she yelled as she ran over and hugged Izuku. I saw what happened on the news, are you okay? The squeeze of the hug was hurting Izuku more than anything else today, but he managed to keep a smile on his face despite it. Yeah, I'm fine. Good thing, Seer was super worried about ya, meow. A girl with two cat ears stepped forward. Seer's face blushed heavily as she shot a good 4 feet away from Izuku. Yaoyorozu looked around and saw one appealing girl after another surround Izuku. Something about all these girls made her feel jealous. However, everything came crashing down as one more girl spoke. It is fortunate that you are okay, Mr. Midoriya. Izuku and Yaoyorozu turned to look at a girl with appealing features and leaf green hair. Her eyes were a wondrous blue that reminded Yaoyorozu of the sky itself. Out of all the girls there she was the most appealing. The girl with cat ears saw an opportunity to tense Seer and began to pull Izuku's right arm. Sorry, Seer, Greenie's mine now. Yaoyorozu felt her face flush, something the green-haired girl took notice of. Seer panicked and grabbed Izuku's left arm and pulled him back toward her. Izuku's shout got cut off by the violent pulling. Ah! Izuku let out a scream of agony as pain shot all the way through Izuku's arm and into his chest. Everyone in the bar turned to see what had happened, even Mia who normally only reacts when her workers are slacking off looked up. Izuku was bundled up on the ground, the pain having removed his ability to stand. Yaoyorozu was about to help him but was stopped by the green-haired woman who stepped toward him first. The song of the now distant forest. The nostalgic song of life. Please bring the mercy of healing to those that seek you. Noah heal. The woman said in a soft tone as green light began covering the boy. All of a sudden the pain stopped. In fact, Izuku felt like he had just woken up. Before he was tired thanks to Recovery Girl's quirk, but now he felt fully revitalized. He slowly got back to his feet and spun his arm in a circle. There was no pain whatsoever. He turned to the woman with a smile on his face. Thanks, Ryu. It is no problem at all. As Ryu said that, the black-haired woman chopped Seer on the hit. Don't go pull people around. And you Anya, you shouldn't tease Seer like that. Both girls held their heads low from being chopped on the head. Yes, Chloe. They both said very apologetically. I didn't know you could heal people. Izuku said in surprise as he turned to look at Ryo who was just standing there. Just another part of my quirk. Ryo wrote it off as nothing special. So are you one of Izuku's friends from school? Seer asked even though she knew the answer from the sports festival. The fact that this girl used his first name did not go unnoticed by Yaoyorozu who felt a twinge of jealousy. She shook those thoughts out of her head as Seer tilted her head while looking at the girl who was shaking her head like a dog. Yeah, I met him on the first day. He got lost in the hallways. Yaoyorozu said with a laugh. Seer and Anya, the latter of which was just listening in, began laughing. They continued talking for a little bit before Mia got angry and all the workers returned to doing their jobs. Izuku and Yaoyorozu made their way back to Ace's agency. Yaoyorozu went off to bed but Izuku who was not tired spent some of the night training with Ace. A man stood in a BLD-filled room, his muscles pushing back in his body. The still fresh bodies were twitching and spasming as the man sat back in one of the chairs. It wasn't enough, he needed more, a thrill, a real fight. I want to kill a hero. He said out loud, boredom was clear in his tone of voice. A footstep alerted him to another person in the room. He looked in the direction and saw a tall man standing there. The man was even taller than him and that said something as he was over 6 foot. How would you feel if I told you I could give you the chance to kill a hero in training? His words piqued his interest. Normally he would kill people like him but something about this man struck some deep-rooted fear he didn't even know he had. However, this man had just given him a chance to kill some hero and that overtook any fear he had. Go on. Under the shade of a tree sat 2 girls, one was very clearly a mother holding a book. The other girl was a child with blonde hair which was a feature shared between the two. The younger of the two sat in the lap of the other, the one holding the book was reading to her daughter. This happy moment got happier as a man with black hair found the 2 girls and went over to them. The child got up and ran over to her dad hugging him as soon as she arrived in his arms. Were you good for your mother, Ace? The father asked his daughter, to which the little girl began nodding her head. That's good. Shall we get going home then? Ace felt her mother's hand wrap itself around hers. The man turned around and began walking away. Suddenly the world went dark as Ace felt the hand that was wrapped around hers turn cold. She blinked and in front of her was the same back of her father except for this time it was bloodied and there stood another person beside him. The red, white and blue pattern on his back combined with his muscles to let her know it was All Might with a glance. The area that they were in was broken down and filled with blood. She looked to her left and saw the lifeless corpse of her mother, Arya. Ace. Please live the best life you can. The words of her father burnt their way into her brain and embedded themselves there. I'm sorry Albert, but I need your help now. All Might said looking forward. Ace's gaze shot past the top pro to see a man with white hair and a suit on. He looked like a monster in human clothes. A massive smile was on the man's face. Yeah, Toshi. Let's take this guy down. Her father was holding a sword in his right hand. The two shot forward as Albert's crimson scarf fell and landed right in front of Ace. Ace shot up in her bed, sweat was beading down her face. It had been a while since she had any dreams about that day. She looked around her room and saw the scarf hanging up. She got up and made her way toward her bathroom. On her way she could smell something that rather pleased her sense of smell. After doing her business she made her way to the kitchen and saw Izuku and Yaoyorozu making food. Oh, good morning Ace. Yaoyorozu greeted. Ace quickly remembered it was the last day of the internships. The three ate breakfast for the last time, enjoying the company of each other for what little amount they could in this last day. After eating they all got their hero costumes on and went to the gym. Today, since it is the last day, I want you to both come at me. No holding back, attack me like you want to kill. The two teens nodded, fully intent on not pulling any punches. However, before they could start, a girl with dark skin and a white cloth walked in. I'll be monitoring this fight. Tiona said with a smile, pointing directly at the small group. Izuku and Yaoyorozu stood facing down the top pro. Tiona could see the electricity in the air as the three just stared at each other until Izuku shot forward with a silver dagger in the back of his hand. The sound of metal clanging against metal rang out through the room as the two clashed. Ace was about to counterattack, but Yaoyorozu wasn't about to let her. Ace raised her left leg and was about to knee Izuku in the stomach, however had to stop and use her leg to fend off Yaoyorozu, who was swngng a Kanata at the hero. Ace used her left knee guard to block the attack. Yaoyorozu was shocked that her attack was blocked by a small piece of metal on Ace's knee. Ace then used her foot and kicked Yaoyorozu in the stomach, causing her to stumble backwards. Ace swung her left fist at Izuku's face, however he saw it coming and dodged under before trying to sweep Ace from under her. His plan backfired as Ace brought her foot down and stomped on Izuku's ankle. Yaoyorozu got back up, pushed through the pain and rushed the hero. She swung her sword, however Ace simply stepped out of the way. This continued as Yaoyorozu kept trying to hit Ace, but to no avail. Izuku got back up and ran toward Ace's back and went to stab her, but without even looking Ace cut Izuku's dagger in two before kicking him in the face again, just like the first day. Yaoyorozu used the time Izuku had brought her to the best of her ability, using the attack she used against Stain. While Ace's back was turned, she had created the weapons. Blades shot out of her chest and made their way over to the sword princess. Ace couldn't dodge the attack as it was too close to her, and nor could she block all the weapons, so a few blades cut into her flesh. A chill then ran down Ace's spine as she felt something staring at her from behind. There was something looking at her, something inhuman. She spun around as quickly as she would if this was a normal fight and intercepted the attack coming from Izuku before disarming him and placing her sword against his neck. Ace stood there, her weapon inches from cutting Izuku's head off. Before she dropped her sword and said simply, "You guys win." They both looked at Ace, who seemed to be distant. "You've both grown so much. So to say goodbye I got you both gifts," Ace said, trying to leave, almost killing Izuku in the past. She walked over to Tiona, who pulled a small box out from under a table and handed it to Ace. Ace then took it and walked over to Izuku before handing him the box. He took it and looked at it. It fit in his hand due to its small size. He slowly removed the top and saw a black knife with small writing on it. He picked up the blade and gave it a look and saw that the edge looked rather blunt. However, the handle fit perfectly in his hand like the weapon was made for him. "Prick your finger on the tip," Ace said while looking at Izuku, who decided to just follow what she had to say instead of talking back. She drilled into him what happened if he talked back. The BLD dripped down the blade, making its way toward the handle where Izuku's hand was. A warm feeling flooded through Izuku as he looked at the black blade begin to change color from blank to violet running through the letters. The light made its way down to the base of the blade. For a second he could swear he felt a beat run through the weapon. The handle now felt warm as though it had adopted his body heat. That knife is alive. Asa's words pulled him back to reality. What do you mean? Izuku questioned, not entirely sure he heard her right. It was made by Hephaestus herself. Izuku began coughing at hearing that. You mean Hephaestus as in the divine smith? That Hephaestus? Ace simply nodded as if it was normal. When it came to weapons and other support ideas for heroes, the top two in Japan are the Hephaestus Familia and the Goibniu Familia. Both are masters at what they do. So for a hero in training to get a weapon made by Hephaestus herself is something unheard of. Thinking of that, Izuku remembered that Wealth has a contract with the Hephaestus Familia. Izuku bowed to the woman while thanking her for the fantastic gift. Ace then turned to Yaoyorozu while grabbing onto a box a lot bigger than the one Izuku got. Ace handed it to Yaoyorozu, who opened it and saw a black robe with a golden button sitting in the area the neck goes. This is the Goliath robe. Ace said. It should provide protection from most physical attacks, and if you press the button at the top it should turn you invisible. Hearing that made Yaoyorozu very excited to try it on. She slipped it on and pulled the hood up. Just from feeling it, she could tell just how much it could protect her. Of course, as is the flaw with all armor, she'll still feel the impact, but things like cuts and quirks should be nullified. Both teens were very happy with their gifts. Izuku placed the knife in the holder around his waist and Yaoyorozu was already wearing her robe. Thank you very much for everything. Both teens said. Very pleased with the time they've spent here. They were standing in the doorway both saying their goodbyes to the place. They turned to leave but got stopped by the voice of their teacher. Grow, when I see you two next I expect you to be much stronger. So go as far as you can. Ace said with a smile on her face, something that surprised Tiona, who didn't know Ace could smile. Yes, Ace. They parted ways. They were happy with their internships, they had both gotten stronger and gained new experiences. But who knew a week could be so long? And they couldn't wait to see how long until they could see Ace again. It was the next day and Izuku had just arrived at school. He walked in and heard everyone talking about what had happened during their internships. Izuku saw Uraraka, Todoroki, Ida, and Yaoyorozu standing around Todoroki's table. Izuku made his way over to his friends. He felt a strange look coming from somewhere, but it felt different from the usual one. This one felt a lot more nervous. Hey, guys. Izuku said to his friends, announcing his presence to the group. Hey, Midoriya. Yaoyorozu spoke up. They began chatting among themselves until they heard the name Stain come from one of their classmates, causing Izuku, Ida, and Yaoyorozu to tense up. You want to talk about who really changed? You should look at those three. Their dim-witted classmate Kaminari spoke up. For some reason it was like Uraraka and Todoroki faded into the background and Yaoyorozu, Izuku, and Ida took center stage for the whole class. Kaminari began getting reprimanded by Jiro and Kirishima, who both thought he was being insensitive. The group went to their own seats by the time their teacher came in. So I hope you all had a fantastic time at your internships. And just like that, Izuku remembered what he hated about going to UA. All Might burst through the door and walked in wearing his Silver Age costume. To get back into schoolwork, we shall be having a fighting tournament. The entire class roared hearing that. But first, we have a new classmate joining us. What? A transfer student. While rare, it is still possible for UA to have a transfer student. But the test to get in via transfer is a lot harder than the entrance exam, so not many people go for it. So what kind of beast had passed it and joined their class? You may enter now. All Might said to someone beyond the door he came in from. The door opened and in walked a girl with flowing black hair tied up in a ponytail, different to Yaoyorozu's. She walked over to the board and bowed to the class. "It is nice you meet you all. My name is Mikoto Yamato." She raised her head and her purple eyes sent a shiver down Mineta's spine. Her gaze shot itself to Izuku and quickly back to the rest of the class. Something about the way she looked at him felt weird, but he rolled with it. All Might then pointed her to an empty seat at the front of Izuku's line. She walked over and was about to sit down before she got stopped by something. She looked back at the seat and saw a pair of floating clothes just in the air. Her eyes widened as she realized that she just sat on the invisible girl of the class. She launched herself off the seat and slammed her head into the ground with enough force to crack it. "I'm so sorry," she shouted before going to her actual seat. "Well, moving on from that, let us head down to training joint C," All Might announced to the class as they grabbed their boxes and made their down to the training area. Izuku could see a few of the girls talking to Mikoto as they made their way to the changing rooms. The boys were getting changed as Izuku felt a few more eyes on him than usual. Right now he was topless, so the other guys were looking at the scar on his shoulder. "Does it still hurt?" Ida asked him as he was unusually close to him. "No, Ryu healed it," Izuku said. One of the stares turned to anger as Izuku said that. "And who is Ryu?" The voice of the small creature made itself known. Izuku tensed up. "Ryu is a friend of mine," Izuku explained as his face became flushed from the question. Some of the guys watching were happy Izuku seemed to be the same as usual. They were worried about him after the attack and hoped he was okay. The group of guys made their way toward the training area. All Might had already given everyone a rundown on what they were meant to do. Pick a partner and fight them in front of the class. Yaoyorozu saw Izuku and began making her way over to him to ask him to train with her, but got stopped as another person spoke up first. "Midoriya, may I ask that you partake in a fight with me?" They all turned to Mikoto, who was asking Izuku to fight. "I'm sure." Izuku agreed, and with that, the first pair of fighters had been chosen. Yaoyorozu felt something hot run through her at seeing Izuku walk off with another girl. "You sad your boy toy got taken?" "Mina." The class watched as the two teens stared each other down. Mikoto's purple kimono was flowing in the wind. Izuku's green hair doing the exact same thing. "So do you think is gonna win?" The short gremlin asked the rest of the class, to which they all pretty much had the same answer. "Sorry, but I'm giving this to Mikoto. Do you guys see that katana? If she cut the distance, he's lost." "Yeah, Mina makes a fair point. Midoriya has no close range advantage." "What about you guys?" Siro said, looking toward Ida and Yaoyorozu, who had both seen Izuku in action since the internships. "I think Midoriya's got this," Ida said, remembering how he was managing to keep pace with the hero killer. Yaoyorozu didn't say anything, just watched the two. The metal door sliding open caught the attention of everyone in the room, including Yaoyorozu, who turned to see a head of red hair with a bandana wrapped around his neck. "Is Midoriya around?" Welf asked Class 1A. They all pointed toward the screen and Welf saw him standing facing down a girl he didn't know. Yaoyorozu saw a white cloth in his hand. He took a few steps and joined the class. Whatever he was holding, he wanted to give it to Izuku. The wind in the fake city was heavy, his hair was going everywhere. Izuku was standing just staring at his new classmate, Mikoto. He placed his hand on the black knife wrapped around his waist. He could feel the warmth coming from it. The wind seemed to die down, and just as it did, "Begin!" shouted the voice of All Might. Without wasting any time at all, Mikoto threw two kunai at Izuku. Izuku pulled out the divine knife and slashed at one while dodging the other. Izuku's use of his blade caught the majority of the class off guard. Izuku rushed toward the kimono-wearing ninja girl. She unsheathed her katana and swung it at Izuku using speed Izuku could only hope to achieve. Izuku managed to block the attack before it could actually make contact. Using this moment Izuku swung his right foot at the girl who dodged backwards. Izuku also jumped back knowing that he had the range advantage out of the two. He lifted his hand up and shot the flames toward Mikoto. The girl saw the flames coming and pointed her blade toward them. Just before the flames hit her she swung her blade from the left to the right and the flames followed along with where the blade was going. Doing a full circle the flames shot back at Izuku. Izuku was shocked she just used his firebolt against him. The flames hit Izuku square in the chest knocking him down to the ground. Did she just redirect the flames at him? Jiro asked the question they all had. Izuku was losing and badly at that. The entire class minus a few people were in shock. For someone who was pretty shy on the way down here, she is a pure powerhouse. A certain student in class 1A was taking this a lot harder than the others. Can I beat her? Bakugou thought to himself before shaking his head. Of course, I can, I'm stronger than any of these extras. I respectfully speak to you, my war god that can break through anything, lead from the precious heaven. Give my petty body divine power of your grand body. Rescue them light of purification, sword of crushing evil. Sweep sword of suppression, sacred sword of conquest. It arrives here now by my order. Descend of heaven, rule the earth. Izuku was slowly getting up as he heard the sounds of a chant. Was she now using her quirk? Izuku fully got up and stepped out of the dust to see the girl shrouded by a purple light. Shinbu Tusiai. Futsu no Mitama. As she shouted that last word a sword of purple light came down from above and stabbed through Izuku. However, he didn't feel anything pass through him. The sword touched the ground and a purple circle covered over the area Izuku was standing in. Suddenly he felt as if gravity itself was now against him as he was being pushed down to the ground. He was trapped in a box of purple light. He was barely able to stand. He had to get out if he wanted to win. He raised his hand and shot flames at the wall but nothing happened. Izuku could see Mikoto clearly using her quirk was straining, but at this rate, he was going to be unconscious by the time Mikoto was down. He closed his eyes and started focusing. As he did, a few blue sparkles began appearing around his hand. I'll break this with as much power as I can use right now. He just had to stay focused for 3 minutes. What the hell is that? Rikido asked All Might. That's her quirk, it's a gravity seal. Its name is Futsu no Mitama. Isn't that the name of the weapon used by Takamikazuchi? Yaoyorozu asked, having read stories about the god when she was young. Right, you are young, Yaoyorozu. The rest of the class didn't how to react. One of the strongest students in their class was being overwhelmed by Mikoto. The purple began glowing even more. Just as the sound of a grand bell echoed through the whole area, even reaching the surveillance room. It was ready. Izuku had a fully charged Argonaut and was prepared to blast his way out of this gravity cage he was trapped in. He raised his left hand and placed his right hand on his shoulder before shooting the explosive beam of light at the wall of purple. The bright light filled the entire area, blinding everyone nearby. When the light faded, the seal was gone and Izuku stood right where he was before. Mikoto looked exhausted but still stood. Izuku gripped the divine knife tightly in his right hand before running at Mikoto. He pushed his left hand out in front, ready to shoot a firebolt at the girl. He cut the distance a bit more. Firebolt. Mikoto prepared to counter the attack again, but it never came. Izuku only continued to cut the distance. Then he swung the knife. It wasn't the same color, in fact, the knife had flames running over it. Izuku swung it and flames shot forward in an arc. The flaming arc blasted its way over to the girl. Unfortunately for Mikoto, she didn't have a counter for this. She put her sword up to defend against the attack, but the katana broke when the arc hit it. She was shot back and into the wall of a nearby building. The area around where she landed began falling off the building. Izuku readied his blade in case she wasn't done yet. The winner is Izukumidoriya. All Might shouted through the intercom. Upon hearing that, Izuku ran over and began helping Mikoto up and taking her back to the watch room. What the hell was that? Ojiro asked as the entire class turned to face Yaoyorozu, hoping that she might have some answers to their questions. I don't know. She said while looking at the screen. Something didn't sit right with her watching Izuku carry Mikoto. Welf had another question for her. However, he held his tongue and waited for Izuku himself to come back. His eyes were glued to Izuku, specifically the area around his waist. After a few minutes, the two fighters walked in. Excellent fighting from the both of you. You may now both rest. Izuku went to sit down as the next two fighters walked up, being Tsuyu Azui and Fumikichi Tokoyami, but within seconds of sitting down, he was surrounded by his classmates who were like vultures. What did you do to your fire? Mina's question broke through the crowd of people and Izuku answered it. Well, I saw what she did to my normal firebolt, so I used the knife to send the flames through, but I didn't think it would do that. Izuku said that last bit with a nervous laugh. Mikoto, who was sitting on the seat next to him, looked at him and was slightly angry with herself for losing to an attack that the user didn't even know worked. But then a light clicked in her head. Sir Izuku, I kindly ask that you help train with me. Mikoto bowed her head as much as she could within the confines of her chair. Izuku looked at her and tilted his head. Sir. He and everyone around him had the same thought. Sure, I don't mind. Izuku replied back, to which Mikoto's eyes seemed to sparkle with childish glee. At first, Izuku was intimidated by her, but now she seems very friendly. Izuku went back to listening to everyone in his class asking him questions about other things, but then his eyes landed on the odd person in the room. Izuku willed his body up and went over to Welf, who was just staring at the screen still. Hey Welf, what's up? Izuku asked as he got closer to the red-haired teen. Welf seemed to break out of his stupor and turned to face the slightly smaller teen. Not much. Do you mind if I have a little talk with you? Welf asked as he pointed toward the door leading to the changing rooms. Izuku followed him out of the room. Upon leaving, Welf turned around and extended his hand out with the white cloth in it. It's for you. I wanted to have it done by the start of the internships, but it took a lot more work to do than I thought it was going to be. Izuku took the cloth and looked at it for a second. May I? Welf nodded to Izuku's question. He began unraveling it and was slightly taken aback at what he was looking at. It was a dark red blade with a slight curve to it. The blade itself is thin. Izuku was sure if he looked strong enough he could see through it. The blade was smaller than the divine knife, but only by a little bit, if Izuku had to say, based on looks, just a few centimeters difference. Out of everything I've ever made, this might be my best work yet. Welf said rather proudly. Izuku gripped onto the handle of the blade and felt a rush run through him. It was different from the divine knife, almost like a bull. It feels great. Izuku said, giving the blade a few swings. I call it the young bull, Ashiwakamaru. Still smiling. Boo, what's this? Welf asked as his entire body seemed to stretch out and circle around Izuku. Welf grasped onto the divine knife. Before Izuku could do anything, Welf was holding the divine knife and running away while looking at it. Izuku began chasing after him and caught up rather quickly due to being faster, and Welf for some reason had stopped running. The blade is dull. Izuku grabbed it and was holding it tightly in his vice-like grip now. Welf noticed the faint violet light coming off the weapon and realized what it was right away. That's a Hephaestus weapon. Right. Welf shouted at Izuku. Why yeah. Izuku said rather nervously. Welf seemed to be lost in thought for a second before a smile appeared on his face. Then you'll be the test. Huh. I want to make a weapon better than Hephaestus, and since I make weapons for you and you also have a Hephaestus weapon, you'll be the test. Welf explained. Izuku had a lot of questions. Do you know Hephaestus? Izuku asked Welf, and he once again smiled. Yep, she helped me when I was in a bad spot. So I promised her I'd make a weapon she can be proud of. They're the ones I worked with on that armor. Welf said while pointing right at Izuku's chest. It finally dawned on Izuku. The sounds of an explosion rang through the hallways, which caused a shiver to work its way down Welf's spine. And with that, I take my leave. Welf said while speed walking down the hallway. Wait, where do I put this blade? As he asked the question, a sheath hit him in the face. Use this, I'll bring you a better one later. Welf ran out of the room and into the main hallway, and a big metal monster slammed into his side and shot him down the hallway. Izuku then saw a pink-haired girl riding on top of it laughing maniacally. May please stop, I'm sorry. Izuku heard Welf's screams get further and further away. It was after school in the staff room. The teachers were all discussing the final exams. The plans were all set for each group but one. So about Izukumidoriya, Momo Yaoyorozu and Mikoto Yamato, is it alright if I ask someone not from UA to go against them in the final exams? Aizawa asked the rat creature named Nizu. Well, that depends on the person. Aizawa smiled as the image of the woman appeared on the screen. Izuku woke up and looked at his roof. It was empty. Though it had been like this for a little over a year now. He then took a look around his room, and just like his wall, there was nothing there. No pictures, no posters, no nothing. He looked out the window and saw the raindrops on the glass. Images of that night in that back alley, the rain pouring down on him, making his body feel heavy. That feeling of hopelessness that he felt back then flashed through his mind. He was so lost in thought that he didn't notice his green hair had fallen and was covering his eyes. The sound of his door opening brought him back to reality. He turned his head to look at it and saw his mother standing in the doorway. Glad to see you're awake. Inko said with a smile. I need you to take some stuff down to the hostess of FRTLTY. Izuku nodded and got up and grabbed some clothes before hopping in the shower. It was a day off from school, and later in the day Izuku and a few others were going to Yaoyorozu's house to study. Izuku didn't need the help, but Yaoyorozu asked him to come to help out with the teaching, and he couldn't just say no. Holding a bag in one hand and an umbrella in the other, Izuku arrived at the hostess of FRTLTY. Upon walking in, he saw Seer in a white dress seemingly about to go somewhere. Right in front of her was a massive basket. If it wasn't for the rain, Izuku would assume she was going for a picnic. Seer turned to the newly entered boy and greeted him. Welcome, Izuku. Her voice was kind, and Izuku could tell due to always being watched that her eyes looked at him with no malice. The cat girl Anya peeked her head into the kitchen. And after a few seconds, the loud and heavy footsteps from Mamma Mia made their way toward him. Oh, kid. Am I glad to see you? The very stout woman stood over Izuku looking down at him, but mostly the bag in his hand. Well, what's taking you so long? Hand over the goods already. Izuku's hand shot up and he basically threw the bag at the woman, who was somehow more terrifying than Aizawa. Mamma Mia was about to thank Izuku before a voice came from the door she came through. What did I tell you about eating her food? It's not my fault. Inko makes better food than you may. Mamma Mia shouted back before running upstairs. A sound of rage echoed out of the kitchen as the woman threw a knife through the door, and it embedded itself in the wall, cutting right through the place Mia was standing before. Seer stepped over to Izuku holding onto the basket with both her hands. Hey Izuku, how are you? She asked. Izuku smiled at the girl, trying his best to ignore the knife stuck in the wall. Not bad. Where are you going? Izuku asked, looking outside at all the rain. Well, I was going to go to a friend's workplace, but I might not be able to because of all the rain. Seer looked rather sad at that. Izuku looked at his phone and saw that it was only 9 a.m., he had to be at Yaoyorozu's by 5:30 p.m. so he had time. I can come with you. Izuku offered his services to the girl. You would? Really? Seer got right up in his face while smiling. Izuku could see Anya in the back sticking her thumb up at him. Izuku took a look around the building and noticed something. Is Ryu in today? Seer looked at Izuku, her smile not as strong as it used to be. No, she's out today on business. And with that, the two went off toward wherever Seer's friend's workplace was. Izuku was holding the umbrella for the two. They got a lot of looks from people on the streets, clearly mistaking them for a couple. How's training going? Seer asked, trying to make conversation. Pretty good, we got a new transfer student in the class this week. Izuku said, remembering his fight against Mikoto. How strong is she? Seer asked once again. I could barely beat her. Izuku said with a chuckle while scratching the back of his head. Izuku then looked at Seer questioningly. I didn't mention her gender, did I? He was about to ask her how she knew that, but stopped when she spoke up. Welcome to Deadless Street. Izuku's gaze shifted to the maze called a street and remembered a few things he hoped he didn't. He shook those thoughts out of his head and continued walking with Seer. Everyone nearby. This place knew what it is like. Deadless is well known as a place where the less fortunate reside. Due to this, it is one of the places with the highest crimes rate in Japan. Izuku, however, had a bit of a different view of this place, having once been living on the streets here. But that also meant that he knew just how bad it could be. Izuku stayed on guard as they made their way through the streets. No words passed through the two as they walked, with Seer seeing how on edge Izuku was. After a few minutes of walking, Seer and Izuku turned a corner and saw a big church that looked like it was falling apart. Seer made a beeline for the building and Izuku followed after. She opened the massive door and the inside of the building didn't look any better than the outside of it. Grass seemed to be growing through the stone floor and some bits were even grown enough to be up to about Izuku's thigh. There was a hole in the roof and rain scattered over the entire area around the hole. Some of the stained glass windows were shattered and broken. I'm here. Seer announced to the building with nobody answering her for a few seconds until a door at the side swung open and out came a group of kids. A lot of the kids ran out and rushed Seer, but 3 kids stopped and stared at Izuku. The kids staring at him were clearly older than the others by quite a fair margin. One of them was a kid with brown hair and brown eyes. Another had cream, almost golden hair and eyes, but she had dog ears and a tail. Something about her reminded Izuku of his friend Naza. The last one was a small kid who Izuku honestly couldn't tell their gender for the life of him. Then quickly stepping out of the room where the kids came from was a woman. She had black hair that was tied up near the top. She looked rather thin, but so did all the kids. She was definitely older than Izuku and Seer. But the way she carried herself reminded him a lot of his mother. Oh, Seer, thank you for coming along again. And you brought a guest with you? She said in a kind voice. It's no problem, Maria. I'm just glad I could be of help. Seer's smile never faded as she spoke. All right, kids, I want you all to sit down. As if her words were spoken by God himself, all the kids fell down and sat on the ground. I would you all to meet my friend, his name is Izukumidoriya. Upon the announcement, the kid with brown hair jumped out from where he was sitting down. I knew I'd seen him before. You're the guy that won the UA Sports Festival. As he said that, a lot of the other kids seemed to roar up and begin jumping up and down. How long have you known Seer? What's it like at UA? How strong is it trying to be a hero? The kids began bombarding him with questions. Izuku didn't know who to answer, question after question began swarming him. Hey! Fear shot up Izuku's spine at the shout. His eyes slowly moved to Seer, who was angry. It was the first time Izuku had seen her angry. Something about the kind yet stern look in her eyes unnerved him, even though it wasn't directed at him. He was still frozen with fear. It's rude to talk over each other. Seer's voice carried a tone that made all the kids' back straighten up. All of the cheerfulness in the room disappeared as the kid sat back down. Silence in the room until one at the back raised their hand. Yes, Fina. Seer said. Are you and Seer dating? A question that caught everybody off guard. A blush shot over Seer's face, she looked at Izuku and saw him red from ear to ear. She gave him a quick kick in the ankle. No, we're not. Izuku said rather robotically. Seer gave a slight laugh at the way he spoke, but she couldn't help it. After more and more questions kept getting asked and Izuku was answering them a lot easier than the first one because they were rather normal compared to it. Until one of the kids asked a question. What's it like being a hero? Izuku had to think about it for a bit. It wasn't like he imagined as a kid. After all, in one of his first encounters with a villain, he got a scar on his shoulder. He decided to answer honestly instead of lying to them. It's strong work. I train every day just to keep up with those around me. Izuku said, his eyes seemingly drifting off into space. Seer seemed to notice this and spoke up. Why don't we go have lunch then? She said in a way that made it seem like a request but at the same time an order. Izuku once again saw the side of Seer that he was now scared of. She raised her basket up and placed it on a table before opening it. As she did, the kids all ran away from her. Some of them looked actually scared of the food. Izuku reached his hand into the basket before Seer slapped it away. None for you. These are for the kids. Izuku then looked down and felt ashamed for even trying now that she put it like that. The two stayed for a bit longer before saying their goodbyes. The kid Izuku now knew as Rai asked him one last question. You're gonna come back, right? Something about the way he said that sounded somewhat sad, like he was used to people leaving but he still didn't want it happening. Izuku put on a smile. Yep, I'll come and see you guys whenever I get a chance. And with that, Seer and Izuku made their way back to the hostess of FRTLTY. Rai turned around after they left and walked over to Fina and Rue. Too easy. He said with an air of confidence about him. You're such a liar, Rai. Fina said while Rue stayed silent. After exiting Deadless Street, Izuku felt the need to ask about the orphanage. How did you meet them? Seer seemed to ponder answering that for a second before she turned to him with a finger covering her lips. That's a secret. She said with a giggle before running out from under the umbrella. The rain had stopped. Izuku looked up and admired the massive mansion in front of him. Well, admired is a strong word. He was in shock at the sheer size of the place. It baffled him that people, actual humans, lived here. And he was friends with one of them. He walked over to the car gate, which seemed to be the only entrance around, before pressing a button and listening to it ring for a second before the voice of his friend answered. Hello. Her voice sounded giddy, like she had not had friends over in a long time, or ever. It's Midoriya. Izuku said, keeping it simple. Oh, Midoriya, I'll let you in, just come up to the front door. The gate then opened fully on its own. Izuku took a few steps in and was already at a crossroads. There was like 5 doors. He stood there trying to figure out which one was the front door. Izuku decided to just stand around and hope that Yaoyorozu would pop out of the front door. And that she did. Izuku ran up to the door and she greeted him. Izuku looked past her and saw a massive group of maids and butlers, all of them bowing. Welcome, Mstr Midoriya. They all said at the same time. Izuku looked at them and questioned if this was reality or if he had died. Yaoyorozu then dragged him off to the Grand Hall. Izuku walked in and looked around. The Grand Hall was basically just a massive dining hall. Izuku noticed that no one else was there but him and her. So am I the first one here? Well, I told you to come earlier than everyone else so we could plan what we were going to teach them. Yaoyorozu's gaze lingered on Izuku for a second before it dawned on her. She just invited a boy over when her parents are out. Yaoyorozu began blushing intensely as she wondered what might happen in the half hour that the other students weren't going to be here. But wait, nothing would happen, right? It's not. Like I have feelings for him or anything. What Mina said before his fight against Mikoto came back to her. I don't have feelings for him. Right? Yaoyorozu was having an argument in her mind while her body decided that it didn't want to keep her teenage hormones inside. Hey, I need to tell you something. Yaoyorozu said as her mind kept trying to keep up with every other part of her body. She got very close to Izuku's face, in fact, a little too close to him. However, she seemed undeterred by the closeness of his face. She opened her mouth to speak again but got stopped as the door opened and in came a butler with a cup of tea on a plate, causing Yaoyorozu to launch herself to the other side of the room. Izuku looked at her for a second before shrugging and doing his part of the work, while Yaoyorozu had to take a few seconds to calm herself down before getting started. The muscle-bound freak shot at the big boar man holding one of the swords. The boar man blocked the attack before punching the muscle villain in the chest, shredding more muscles. Not strong enough. The boar man got closer to the muscle villain. Grow more, for my lady. Screams echoed through the room but not a single one escaped outside. The students of Class 1A stood all lined up looking at the teachers of UA. Currently, they are standing outside a fake city made by UA for classes. They had already taken their written exams, so they were here to learn what they were going to do for the practical. The fact that all the teachers were present made a few of the students way more nervous than before. Welcome students. A small furry animal popped his head out of Aizawa's scarf while waving at the teens. Aizawa looked pissed off but kept it to himself as he liked this job. So despite what you may have heard, you won't be fighting robots this year. The principal said with a certain amount of joy in his voice. Due to recent situations, you'll be fighting us teachers in pairs of 2. Anxiety filled the students, shooting through them like lightning. Of course, you're not just going to fight us without some kind of advantage. Us teachers are going to be wearing bands which are a portion of our own weight. Nizu told the students, trying to ease the still rising anxiety. Now to break you down into teams. Aizawa said, choosing his words carefully as he wanted to make them as nervous as possible. So first up will be shototodoroki and Katsuki Bakugou against me. The grin shot fear through the 2 students. The teams will be as followed. Mina Ashido and Denki Kaminari vs Nizu. Yuga Aoyama and Ochako Uraraka vs number 13. Koji Koda and Kyuka Jiro vs Present Mike. Tsuyu Azui and Fumikage Tokoyami vs Ectoplasm. Minoru Mineta and Hanta Siro vs Midnight. Mizo Shoji and Toru Hakigure vs Snipe. Rikido Sato and Ejiro Kirishima vs Cementos. Tenya Ida and Mashireo Ojiro vs Power Loader. And last was Izukumidoriya, Momo Yaoyorozu and Yamato Mikoto vs. The students all eyed up their teachers. Some were afraid while others were nervous. And one was down bad while looking at Midnight, who just licked her lips in a way that made Mineta weak at the knees. Izuku looked at the 3 question marks and raised his hand. Why is ours just question marks? He asked Aizawa. Because there is 3 of you, so to make it fair you don't get to know who you're up against. It was a very rational decision. Izuku then started thinking of the other teachers at UA, and the only one left was All Might. Well, I will tell you, it isn't a member of UA. Aizawa said, deciding to throw a bone to his students. The 3 then decided to discuss who they think it might be while the first pair were up. The 2 teens walked out into the field and saw it was an urban area. Looking around, they were clearly at a big disadvantage just from the stage. Both of their quirks would cause a high amount of damage to the building and other surroundings. Thankfully their tester would be the most affected by the weights due to his close-range fighting style. However, there was the problem that neither of the students were trained in hand-to-hand combat. At most Todoroki knew how to take a punch thanks to his dad. And Bakugou's undeterred will might mean they can wear him down, but they really doubted it. Bakugou, we need a plan. Todoroki said toward the blonde teen who was seething at something. You've been spending too much time with sparkles. I'll blow this C-list hero into the ground. Bakugou said through gritted teeth as he stepped forward. The siren rang, letting all three of them know that the battle had begun. Bakugou walked off, trying to get away from Todoroki. Todoroki, on the other hand, would normally do the same thing, but splitting up against Aizawa was the worst possible thing to do. Bakugou knew this, but he refused to stop after seeing Sparkles and the new girls fight. He wanted to show them both up. And how else to do that than to beat their very own teacher in one-on-one combat? After all, it's not like Icy Hot is gonna help him. Bakugou blasted off down the street faster than Icy Hot could hope to keep up with. Todoroki created an ice path and slid across it, trying to catch up to his hot-headed teammate. Todoroki hated working with him, but this was taking it too far. Todoroki had been fully left behind now. He looked around, hoping to find at least something about where his teacher may have been. He saw a slight bit of movement to his right and shot a massive pile of ice right at it. His ice hit nothing, his teacher wasn't there. He looked at the mountain of ice and realized something. Not very discreet, are you? Before Todoroki even had a chance to turn around, a white cloth wrapped itself around him and bound him in it. Now would you be willing to tell me where that teammate of yours went? As Aizawa said those words, he noticed Todoroki's eyes widened at something behind him. Aizawa turned his head, planning to finish this right now, and he saw Bakugou with his hand pointed out at him. He was already using his quirk due to subduing Todoroki, but his quirk didn't stop Bakugou, who pulled the pin on his gauntlet. Aizawa knew what that meant, so he leapt out of the way. However, a smaller explosion than what he was expecting tore through the air and crashed into Todoroki. Todoroki was blasted back and into a house. Aizawa, who was connected to Todoroki by the capture weapon, was dragged and hit his head on a wall. His vision became blurry, but he still knew where Bakugou was due to the boy being able to keep his mouth shut. Bakugou stood there slightly shocked by the fact he had just hit his teammate, but he convinced himself there was nothing wrong with it. It's his fault for not being able to dodge. He prepared himself to attack Aizawa. He shot forward and went to kick his head back into the wall. Aizawa dodged backwards and brought his elbow down on Bakugou's ankle. The teen let out a yell of pain as Aizawa wrapped the capture cloth around his body. He pulled Bakugou toward him, but Bakugou had seen this back at the USJ. Aizawa brought Bakugou's face toward his knee. Bakugou moved his head slightly to the right and dodged the knee. Then smoke filled the area as Bakugou dropped a ball on the ground. Boom! The ball Bakugou had dropped exploded and sent him flying away from Aizawa. Bakugou used this brief time to attack once again. He set off an explosion but got stopped when his quirk stopped working. Thanks for the time to dry my eyes. That was getting annoying. Aizawa said with the same sadistic grin he always had. Bakugou was then thrown into the ground and had his chest stomped down on. Looks like I win, he said as flames shot toward his back. He leapt up to dodge and turned around to stop Todoroki from using his quirks, but all he saw was an ice wall. Then, heaven-piercing ice wall. Aizawa dodged every bit of ice that was shot at him. He landed on a nearby rooftop and looked down to see Bakugou was missing. I didn't need your help, you icy hot bstrd. Bakugou spat at his teammate and Todoroki was sick of him. Shut up. Todoroki was struggling to move while Bakugou could barely breathe. So as much as it hurt the other to do, they were helping each other walk toward the exit. We wouldn't be in this situation if you had just worked with me from the start, Todoroki said with venom lacing his words. I gave you the chance to leave, you're the one who came back. Bakugou shot back. Todoroki stopped moving and dropped Bakugou. Are you telling me you hit me on purpose? Bakugou looked at Todoroki and he wanted to say something, anything. But instead, his pride made him say the one thing he didn't want to. Yeah. And I'd do it again, you extra. It took a lot to push Todoroki over the edge, but that did it. You're a rotten bstrd. Not only do you attack your teammates, you're not ashamed of it in the least. I understand why Midoriya hates you so much. Bakugou hated the mention of his name. What the hell does Sparkles have to do with anything? Even on the first day of school, he hated you. And God, did he have the right idea? You're an insufferable but who can't even work with someone else for 10 minutes. Why are you here? Why did you come to UA? Just to F around and get famous. You are not and never will be a true hero. This was the first time Bakugou had seen Todoroki this angry. He wanted to say something back but got stopped. You guys are so loud. You know that, right? They both turned to see Aizawa. Todoroki tried to make an ice wall again but couldn't. You really are a one-trick pony. Bakugou threw a grenade, which blinded the man for a second, so Todoroki placed up an ice wall in what little time he could. Using his time, he ran around a building and out of sight. Bakugou tried a more direct way and sent a massive explosion hurling toward the ice wall with intentions of blowing through it and hitting Aizawa. However, the plan failed when Aizawa attached his weapon to a light pole and pulled himself up and out of the way. But Bakugou wanted him to do this, so he raised his right as a red light pulsed from within the gauntlet. He pulled the pin and a massive explosion hurled toward his teacher, who didn't have enough time to dodge the attack. Aizawa was blasted into a building. Bakugou began cheering for his own victory. He limped toward Aizawa and saw it. The man had gotten out of the hole. Been a while since I was blown up like that. Naruhata, was it? Oh well. Bakugou's eyes widened at the hero. How the hell are you still standing? I've felt worse. But I'll make sure you never feel any worse than this. Aizawa said with a low voice, clearly trying to intimidate the boy. To much success. Aizawa took a few steps toward Bakugou. Katsuki Bakugou and shototodoroki. Pass. The voice of Nizu rang out through the whole arena, which stopped the two people from moving anymore. Aizawa grumbled before walking away. Bakugou fell down, not able to stand any longer. He was weak and he could no longer deny that. The students were standing in the waiting room talking. All of them had watched that shit show and could understand why Todoroki got pissed off at him. With the end of their test, Izuku exited and went down a hallway. He kept walking till he found what he was looking for. He knocked on the big metal door and after a few seconds, the door swung open. Izuku looked down a bit and saw the hero, Power Loader. The two stared at each other for a few seconds before Izuku spoke. Is Welf here? He asked the rather short man. Hey! Welf! Come here, Izukumidoriya is here. Power Loader shouted into his classroom. Izuku could some muffled shouts coming from a massive pile of metal before Welf popped out. Sorry about that. May made a maze of metal and needed help untangling it. Welf said that in a way that made Izuku sad. He didn't have an older brother. Anyway, what's up? Well, I was wondering if you want to go on a trip with me. Welf looked at him funny at first but then got excited. Well, where are you planning to go? Before Izuku answered the question, he began on his tangent. Well, I asked a few other people but they were already going and I didn't know who else to ask, so I thought you would like it to come. Of course you don't have to come or anything, I just thought I'd ask, you know. Izuku said without taking a single breath. Whoa, calm down buddy. Just tell me where we're going. Okay. Welf said, trying to help his friend not pass out. Izuku took a deep breath and spoke. Do you want to come with me to Island? The entire class stopped moving. Welf looked frozen for what felt like a few minutes, just staring at Izuku. They are doing an expo and since you're in the support field I was wondering if you wanted to be my +1. Hell yeah dude. I'd love to go. Welf shouted as if he wanted to make his classmates jealous. Cool. I'll text you the details. Izuku shouted as he ran off down the hall and back to the testing arena. Welf turned around with a smug smile on his face. Oh, how it pays to have friends in high places. Izuku made it back just in time for his test. Izuku, Yaoyorozu and Mikoto made their way to the arena. The three were discussing tactics, though they couldn't come up with a plan due to not knowing who they were up against. They walked into the testing grounds and instantly the air felt heavy. Whoever they were up against was strong. On the other side of the arena, a foot planted firmly on the dirt of the forest. The woman looked forward, her face stoic and unwavering. "Let us start this then." The three were standing around at the start of the forest, waiting for the ring to tell them they can start. "So who do we think we're up against?" Izuku asked. Both girls seemed to start thinking. Mikoto was the first to speak up about the matter. "I believe that it will be the equipped hero, Yoroi Musha." Logically speaking, that makes a lot of sense. All three of them were proficient in close-quarters combat. "I think it will be Ace," Yaoyorozu said. Mikoto looked at Yaoyorozu weirdly, wondering why Yaoyorozu just said her name with any sort of respect to her. "Yeah, I was thinking Ace as well," Izuku said, backing up her choice. Mikoto wanted to ask about it but held back as the bell rang out. The three students then started making their way through the forest, looking for anything that seemed out of place in a forest. After a few minutes of running, they found a clearing. They decided to take a minute to rest up and try to find where the exit is, but something got in the way of the rest. They all heard the wind howling. He felt it, its gaze. Izuku placed up the divine knife and Ushiwakamaru. A blue flash came from the forest and something blunt hit him in chest armor. Izuku was sent flying by the force of the attack. He smashed through 2 trees before coming to a stop on the third one. Yaoyorozu and Mikoto saw this woman and went in for an attack. Mikoto gripped onto Zensetsu, the kanata she got to replace the one Izuku broke during their fight. The woman kicked Yaoyorozu in the stomach, knocking her back a few meters before swngng down toward Mikoto. Zeka. Using a quick draw technique, Mikoto managed to block the attack. The blades clashed, but the brute force behind the woman's attack was enough to make Mikoto back off. Izuku slowly got up despite the pain surging through him. He locked eyes with the woman. "I know you." The students all watched as Izuku was destroyed by the first attack. None of them had any clue who this woman was, but he was wiping the floor with them. The door behind them slid open and they turned to look at who entered. They all saw Welf and Aizawa. "Oh, it's already started. Makes sense." From the looks of it, Aizawa dragged Welf here to watch Izuku's final exam. "Anyway, Welf is gonna join us to watch this. I'd like you all to meet a friend of mine," Aizawa said as some other teachers walked in curious to see what Aizawa's friend is made of. "Meet Gale Wind. Ryu," Izuku shouted, looking at the tester. Yaoyorozu perked her head up at hearing that. "Hello, Mr. Midoriya," she said. Her voice was as cold and stoic as ever. She was wearing something over her mouth and had her hood up. But Izuku could see her green hair and sky-blue eyes. She was wearing a green cape that covered her entire back and was connected to her hood. She had brown gloves that went up to her elbows and thigh-high boots of the same color. She was holding a wooden sword that was able to go toe-to-toe with Mikoto katana. Izuku stood up and readied himself for combat with Ryu. Yaoyorozu also managed to stand up, her robe flowing in the wind. Both teens began rushing the woman, who in turn began dodging. Then a sharp pain shot through her right arm. She looked to see 2 kunais stuck in her arm. Izuku and Yaoyorozu went in for another attack. However, when they arrived, Ryu was gone. Their ears tracked the clash of weapons come from their right. Quickly they both spun on their feet and ran over to help Mikoto. Ryu was in the middle of rushing toward Mikoto when she placed her wooden weapon back in its sheath while gripping onto it. Mikoto grabbed onto Zensetsu, which was on back in its sheath. They both drew their weapons and clashed. "Zeka!" Mikoto shouted. "Tachi!" Ryu yelled back. The impact of weapons pushed Mikoto off balance, which Ryu used to her advantage, sending a kick hurling straight for Mikoto's head. Luckily Mikoto managed to place her arm in the way just in time. Ah! However, the sound of her arm being fractured rung out for even Izuku and Yaoyorozu to hear. Mikoto then received another kick in the side, sending her into a nearby tree. Slice. Ryo turned around at the sound of something slicing behind her. She saw Izuku holding the violet blade with a little trickle of blood on it. Her cape had been cut through and the blade grazed her back. Ryo brought her weapon up and swung it down, aiming for Izuku, but he managed to catch it between his blades. Ryo's eyes widened. Even with these weights she still should have been faster than he could block. She went in for another attack on him but had to stop as she noticed Yaoyorozu coming in from the left. The girl was holding her sword with full intentions of cutting Ryo in half. Ryo could feel this and leapt up into the air to dodge the attack. She landed just a bit back and pointed her weapon at them. Mikoto could only watch. As much as that pained her. The other students as well as some of the teachers were watching in shock. All four fighters had extreme skill with close-quarter combat and it showed. All of the students knew they were strong, but to be at this level already was insane. On the other hand, all the teachers were surprised by Ryo's strength. To think someone could move that fast while having those weights on was shocking. However, two teachers were watching without any shock. Midnight was impressed by Izuku's growth. She wanted to cheer for the boy, but held back due to this being a test. Aizawa was watching intently. He wanted to know just how far his students had come. And just how weak Ryo had become. The three ran at each other. Izuku and Yaoyorozu had already worked together during training with Ace and in the Stain fight. They understood how fast and strong the other one was. As they got closer to their target, Izuku picked up speed and clashed with her first. Yaoyorozu recognized this as the attack they used on Stain. Izuku swung Ushiwakamaru toward Ryo, who managed to duck under the attack. She then brought her knee up and hit Izuku in the stomach. Vomit shot out the teen's mouth as he felt his breath leave him. She went in for another attack, but Izuku was pulled back and Yaoyorozu clashed with the wood-wielding woman. Izuku dropped Ushiwakamaru on the ground over by the two fighters. Izuku was using this chance to catch his breath. Yaoyorozu dodged under an attack aimed for her eye and swept Ryo off her feet. She then swung her blade upward as Ryo fell toward it. Ryo grabbed onto Yaoyorozu and pushed off her, dodging the attack but not entirely as the blade grazed her abdomen. She landed and ran toward Yaoyorozu, who managed to create a small shield to block the attack. She felt the impact, but it wasn't as bad as it could be. She threw away the shield and shot a blade out of her arm. Izuku stood watching the fighters go back and forth. Frustration built up within him. He couldn't get close to the fight, then he remembered his quirk. Firebolt, he said as flames shot forward and hit Ryo in the back. Knocking her off balance, Yaoyorozu used this chance to slice her thigh, hoping to slow the woman down. Ryo responded by punching Yaoyorozu in the face. However, she didn't waver. If training with Ace taught her anything, it was how to take a punch. Yaoyorozu gave one back, punching Ryo in the face. Deciding that she had enough of this game, Ryo kicked Yaoyorozu in the leg, then punched her again, knocking her down to the ground. She turned back to Izuku and readied herself to end this exam right here, right now. She shot forward but got stopped as two more kunai stabbed into her ankle. Mikoto was standing with a lot of struggle and used her only safe attack. Firebolt, he shouted as flames shot out like electric. His want to win and desperation pushed him to greater heights as another swarm of flames shot out of Izuku's hand without him having to chant again. Ryo wasn't expecting the second round of heat and leapt back to dodge the attack. Izuku used this chance to rush at her with the divine knife. He went for a stab with the weapon, but Ryo dodged it and punched him in the gut. He lost his breath again, however, he didn't stop his attack. He began swinging the knife wildly, hoping to at least hit her, and to his happiness he got a few grazes in. But his inability to breathe caused him to collapse. He landed on top of his left arm, covering his entire arm and hand with his body. His right hand was sprawled out with the knife hanging limply from his grip. He was done, he couldn't continue any longer. Yaoyorozu had managed to get back up despite the pain. Her body was yelling at her to stay down, but she knew they would lose if she didn't get up. She created another sword as Ryo turned her attention back to her. The two met in a battle of glares. Mikoto could feel the intensity in the air and cursed herself for being so useless, but then she had a thought. Yaoyorozu and Ryo clashed with each other once again. Yaoyorozu had to use two smaller blades just to be on equal grounds with the wood-wielding woman. I respectfully speak to you, my war god that can break through anything. Both fighters turned their heads toward where they heard the chanting coming from. Mikoto was standing up, her back straight, she was going to help her teammates. Through all the pain. The chant wasn't even done yet, but she could still feel the strain already tearing through her arm. Lead from the precious heaven. Give my petty body divine power of your grand body. Purple circles began appearing around Ryo. Ryo now recognized Mikoto as the bigger threat and was about to rush off to stop her when a noise got caught in the wind. The sound of a bell was carried. Yaoyorozu and Ryo looked toward Izuku, who was not standing while holding the divine knife in his left hand, which was glowing. Ryo then changed to go after Izuku but got stopped by Yaoyorozu, who wasn't about to let her get to her friends. Thinking through her options, Ryo decided to pull out all the cards. In the sky of a distant forest. Infinite stars scattered the endless night sky. Respond to my foolish voice, grant me divine protection of starfire. Ryo began chanting as well. However, Mikoto managed to finish her chant first. Shinbu Tusiai, Futso no Mitama. Yaoyorozu leapt back and dodged the falling sword. Ryo was now trapped while finishing her chant. The bright light covering Izuku's hand left and entered the divine knife. Izuku looked at the weapon and arrived at a question. Will this be enough? Then he had a thought. Yaoyorozu. She looked toward him to see what was up. Sei saw the divine knife flying toward her, she grabbed it and looked at it. The violet light that usually surrounded it wasn't there. The blade looked dead. Izuku squeezed his right hand and remembered what he had done a few minutes ago. The double shot. 2 firebolts with 1 chant. He had never done that before, but now, he knew what it felt like. Looking at Izuku, Yaoyorozu had an idea of what he was going to do. A joint attack, using the Argonaut charged divine knife and a firebolt punch. But it wouldn't work without Izuku using the divine knife due to it being tied to him. However, she trusted him, so she prepared herself. They both shot forward as Ryo got to the end of her chant. Give the mercy of light to the one that abandoned you. Come, wandering wind, the wandering traveler. Cross the sky and run through the wilderness, run faster than anything else. Fill me with the light of the stars, and strike. Luminous wind dash. The end of her chant was interrupted when the gravity seal fell and Izuku struck her on the cheek. Firebolt. He shouted as the flames spiraled around each other and created a drill of electric-like flames that shot forward and blasted Ryo toward Yaoyorozu. Now! Izuku shouted to her. Yaoyorozu was about to throw the blade at Izuku but quickly realized that he wouldn't be able to do anything with it. She looked for a way to do something with the dull blade until it clicked. His plan. Prick your finger on the tip. Asa's words replayed in her mind. Holding the knife, she placed the blade bit of the knife on her open palm and slid it open. BLD poured out and consumed the knife. The crimson liquid seemed to glow as she felt an intense heat coming from the blade. The violet letters glowed through the white light. She swung the blade forward at Ryo, who was still flying toward her. The knife cut into her chest and an explosion shot forward, sending everyone but Izuku flying. Quickly recovering, Izuku ran toward Ryo, who was still on the ground, and placed the HNDCFFS around her wrist. Team Izukumidoriya, Momo Yaoyorozu and Yamato Mikoto. Pass. They had done it. They won. Having just placed the HNDCFFS on Ryu's wrist, Izuku felt like he was going to collapse. The pain began surging due to the adrenaline pumping through his veins ceasing. He took a few steps toward his teammates who were both lying on the ground unconscious from pushing themselves too far. After taking a few more steps he felt his balance waver. His vision was going black, he could feel his consciousness fading. But he still wanted to make sure everyone else was all right. He looked forward at Yaoyorozu and stretched his hand out. But then he felt someone grab onto him and embrace him, holding him upright. "It's okay, now you may rest." The familiar words made him relax. She saved him once again. He looked up before falling unconscious and saw her blue eyes staring into his soul. The other students who watched that were baffled. The fight they just watched was intense. Even some of the teachers had no words. Welf was impressed with Izuku and with the blade he made, happy it wasn't broken during the fight. Bakugou stood his hand clenched tightly due to frustration. For one of the first times in his life he felt weak. After everyone had been brought up to the nurse's office, a few students made their way there. They wanted to check up on their friends. Todoroki, Ida, Azui, Uraraka, Mina, Hagakure and Welf. Ida was leading the charge. He walked up to the door and knocked on it rather loudly twice. After a few seconds of waiting the door swung up and a small woman slammed a cane against Ida's knee. "Quiet down," she said, her voice was stern yet quiet. Ida bowed and apologized. Recovery girl stepped out and closed the door behind her. "You can't see them, they're all asleep right now. They'll be fine, I'll contact your homeroom teachers to tell you after they wake up." She explained, due to years of doing this she already knew what they wanted and didn't wait for them to ask. The students all relaxed, happy to hear their friends are okay. They all let out a sigh at the same time before making their way back to the classrooms to hear about their tests. Back in the nurse's office, one of the patients was in his dreams remembering something he wanted to forget. Not wanting to go back to his classroom until he knows for sure if Izuku was fine, Welf went with the rest of the group as they made their way to get some food from the cafeteria. They all found a pretty open table and sat down. Even after finishing their tests, the students were asked to stay until the end of the day. They began chatting amongst themselves. "That fight was so intense," Mina said as she stretched her arms above her head. She looked around the table before sitting forward. "So what do you think the deal with Yamamoto and Midoriya is?" she asked, her voice a lot more gleeful than before. This question seemed to get Hagakure involved as well as she sat forward. Uraraka seemed interested in this topic as well, however, you would never see her ask about it directly. Ida opened his mouth to say something but got stopped by Todoroki who spoke first. "What deal?" he asked as dense as ever. Welf wrapped his hand around him. "You'll understand when you're older," he said very older brotherly. Todoroki didn't know how he felt about someone acting so pally with him, but he thought it was normal so he let it go. "I think they look rather cute together." Azui threw in her 2 cents. "I know right," Mina said, dragging her O's. Feeling weird about talking about them without them actually being there, Ida decided to change the topic. "It seemed like Midoriya and Yaoyorozu knew that hero. What do you think that was about?" "Yeah, it was kinda weird seeing them freeze up," Uraraka said, looking toward the blue-haired teen. "Has anyone even heard of Gale Wind before?" Hagakure asked. A few people shook their heads at her question. They chatted about other things for a bit longer. He opened his eyes and the first thing he saw was black hair being swished around by an open window with air pouring through. He saw the now very familiar room of the school's nurse's office. How many times had he woken up in a white room now? He really didn't need to do this every time he had some kind of fight. He sat up a little and noticed Yaoyorozu was on a bed like him, but hers was right next to the window. The sound of the bed rustling reached her ears and she turned to see what had happened. She saw Izuku now staring at her with the sunlight shining throughout the whole room. She smiled. Izuku saw her smile and felt warm. It was like her smile was radiating sunlight, more sunlight than the actual sun itself. "Morning," he said, now fully sitting up in the bed. "How are you?" he asked, remembering her getting hurt during the fight. "So I'd say, more tired than anything else," she said rather jokingly. "What about you?" She looked toward his stomach where he had been kicked and kneed multiple times. "It kinda hurts to move, I guess." He lifted his arm and turned it. He looked down and noticed he wasn't in the armor anymore. Thankfully he still had the underlayer on. He gave a quick look around and finally noticed Mikoto and Ryo, who were just lying there in other beds staring at the two. Mikoto spoke up first. "Sorry, it was such a nice moment." She raised her hand and placed it in front of her face. Mikoto's arm was in a sling wrapped around her neck. Ryo looked away for a second. "Seer is going to be disappointed," she muttered, sounding rather saddened by this turn of events. Izuku noticed the bandages wrapped around her stomach. Her face also had a big red mark on it. He saw his armor sitting nearby the door and quickly took notice of the massive dent done in the chest piece. A few other pieces of the armor were destroyed as well. Welf was not going to be happy with him for that. The door slid open with enough force to cause his chest piece to fall down. Izuku looked over to it and saw the old lady sitting in the doorway looking just as pissed as she was whenever Izuku appeared to get healed. "Oh good, you're all awake." Despite saying that in a very nice tone, her face told them to get out already. Clearly, she wasn't enjoying their presence. "Once you're all well rested, you're free to leave." She walked over to a desk that was made for someone of her size or a prum in mind. Izuku moved the covers out of his way and placed his feet on the ground. His legs hadn't taken as bad a beating as his stomach. He stood up and looked at his phone. He was asleep for about 3 hours. So there was still about 1 hour left in school. Yaoyorozu also got up and was getting ready to leave. Mikoto opted to stay in for a bit longer to rest. Ryo was already out the door and was leaving. Izuku and Yaoyorozu left together and began making their way toward their own classroom. Once again it was just the two of them as they walked. The air around them felt tense as neither one knew what to say to the other. So they walked all the way to the classroom without saying a single word to one another. They walked in and saw all of their classmates, including Welf, sitting around just waiting for them to get up. Right away Mina slammed into Yaoyorozu, knocking her off balance. Clearly, she was happy for her friend. Izuku then felt an arm wrap itself around his shoulder and a person began leaning on him. He looked over and saw Welf with his wide smile plastered on his face. Next thing they knew, they were surrounded by their friends making sure they were all right. As the questions bombarded them, Izuku had a thought. How much has my life changed? Everything about his life was different now. He had friends. He had loved ones. And he has someone he looks up to who also believes in him. As he thought this, a voice came from the door behind him. "Mr. Midoriya." He turned around and saw Ryo standing there. "As agreement for me helping with your exam, Mama Mia has asked that you stop in and spend some money." Izuku wanted to laugh at her request but then realized how Mia that was. "Will do. Why don't we go together to celebrate you guys passing your exam?" Welf said, rallying the few of Izuku's friends together. "I'm down," Mina said, leading the charge into the new restaurant. "We can go during summer vacation," Hagakure said, putting the plan into motion already. Everyone agreed. After that, Welf went back to his classroom and everyone, Mikoto returned, took their seats as Aizawa walked in prepared to give them their results. "So first off, I'll start with Ida and Ojiro." The two named students gulped at hearing their names. "You two passed." Jiro and Koda passed. Ashido and Kaminari failed. Shoji and Hagakure passed. Tsuyu and Tokoyami, passed. Kirishima and Sato, failed. Uraraka and Aoyama, passed. Mineta, passed. However, due to passing out during the exam, Shiro failed. It was the final two. Izuku, Yaoyorozu and Mikoto were nervous. They hoped they passed, but after the injuries they sustained they honestly didn't know. Todoroki and Bakugou, however, were pretty calm about it. Midoriya, Yaoyorozu and Mikoto, passed. All three of them were very tempted to jump out of their seats in happiness about passing. But they didn't. Todoroki, passed. However, due to not working with his teammates and also injuring him, Bakugou, failed. The world fell. Bakugou felt like he was on the verge of a panic attack. Something he had never had before. All his life everyone told him he could be the strongest, but yet here he was failing an exam. Sparkles had passed. After school had ended, Hagakure said that they should go shopping as a class. The entire class was on board apart from Bakugou, who had disappeared when class was over, and Todoroki, who was planning on visiting his mother on that day. So that was the plan for the first day of the holidays. However, while they were planning this, somewhere in the dark depths of the city, a man had lost all his sanity. A sword swung through the air, aiming right for the head of a boarman. He easily countered it and punched the muscle-bound freak in the stomach with enough force to tear apart the muscles. Otter had decided this was enough. "I want you to join the League of Villains." "Yes, sir." This bloodthirsty beast was tamed by the man's brute force. "Once in, find and kill this boy." Otter then held up a picture of a boy with green hair and green eyes. The picture was taken at the sports festival. Izuku was standing next to All Might after having won the sports festival. "And take this." Otter then threw a new and undamaged blade at the man, who caught it rather easily. "They will be attacking the school in the next month." Muscular began walking to his information broker to ask for advice on how to get in. The students of Class 1A had just arrived at the Kiyoshi Ward shopping mall. It was one of the first days of summer before they went off to the camp. The class had decided to come here to have some fun before going to the hostess of FRTLTY. They had split into groups of their friends. Around Izuku was Yaoyorozu, Uraraka, Ida, Mikoto and Azui. And surrounding Kirishima was Mina, Hagakure, Denki, Mineta, Shiro and Jiro. The rest of the students were broken down into smaller groups. Izuku was rushing around looking at all the different types of clothes and other things they had that were suited to so many different people. He saw a shirt that Shoji would fit in. And upon looking a bit closer, he found clothes that were resistant to fire and acid, among other things. Mikoto was looking for a replacement for her blades that keep shattering. Azui was looking for gifts as one of her little siblings' birthdays was coming. Ida was looking for more glasses. "Hey, isn't that Class 1A of UA?" A man shouted loud enough to gather a small crowd. "You're Izukumidoriya, right?" A man shouted, getting more attention toward Izuku. "I can't believe people still remember that," Uraraka said while scratching the back of her head. While that is happening, Izuku was being dragged away by the rush of people trying to get his autograph. The rest of the class was also split up, with only a few people managing to stick with their friends. Uraraka looked around. Like much of her class, she was lost. She took a few steps in a single direction, hoping to find one of her classmates. But her eyes were drawn in by golden hair walking around. There was a girl walking around in a school uniform Uraraka didn't recognize from anywhere. Was it from Kiyoshi? Probably, they were in Kiyoshi after all. She was just standing there, staring at her, clearly entranced by the appealing girl. She had not noticed the fact that the girl was staring right back at her. After a few seconds, it clicked that the blonde girl was making her way over to her. "Why are you looking at me?" Her voice was cold. Clearly, she didn't like the attention. Uraraka became flustered. Why was she staring at this stranger? Not even she could answer that question. So she answered with something that took away all blame and guilt from staring at someone. Sorry, I just zoned out. That was both right and wrong. She knew she was staring, but at the same time, she couldn't look away. The cold look in the blonde girl's eyes stayed for a few extra seconds. Before fading, the look in her eyes became gleeful. Okay, whatever. The girl said. Even Uraraka could tell she wasn't convinced. Well, I thought for a second that I had caught the attention of the Ochako Uraraka. Her tone and way of speaking changed, suddenly catching Uraraka off guard. You know me. You'd be strong-pressed to find someone who doesn't know you. After all, your fight at the sports festival was something to remember. Something about this oddly cheery girl felt off to Uraraka. Oh yeah, the name's Himiko Toga. The girl said, sticking her hand out to the hero in training. A small girl walked over. The girl in question had chestnut-colored hair and eyes. Come on, Himiko, we have that meeting. She said as she kept walking past Uraraka. Well, that's my cue. Himiko said as she took off after the other girl. I'll be seeing you a lot sooner than you think. Himiko was gone. Uraraka didn't even get the chance to say goodbye to her. Ending up in the middle of the mall without any clear route back to his friends was not how Izuku expected this day to go. Right now he was separated from his friends and didn't know where they were. He went to pull his phone to call one of them but got stopped when he heard his name. Hey, you're the kid who won the first-year sports festival, aren't you? He looked over to the guy who had a black hoodie with the hood up on. Little strands of light blue hair were sticking out the front of the hood. He got closer and wrapped his arm around Izuku like Welf does. Been a while since we last saw each other. Sorry, have we met before? He said, thinking the man's voice was somewhat familiar. Wow, I thought you'd remember me since you know, I tried to kill you. Izuku looked up to face the man and saw the face that haunted his nightmares. Tamura Shigaraki. Yaoyorozu looked around for any of her friends but couldn't find them. As she looked around, her eyes landed on a familiar head of chestnut-colored hair. A prom. The one she had met during the internships. What was her name again? Lilaruka. Why was she here? Wasn't she in Shizuoka? Yaoyorozu wanted to follow after but then remembered she had to find her friends. Glad to see you do remember me after all. His voice had that same raspy sound to it. Just looking at the man in front of him, Izuku was almost having a panic attack. This was the same man that almost killed him and his friends. I couldn't forget. Izuku's voice was cold and emotionless. Not very nice to say to an old friend. Don't dirty that title by giving it to yourself. You never were and never will be my friend. Shigaraki's hand was wrapped around Izuku's neck with only a finger not touching. All right then, I'll cut to the chase. Does he have a reason for this? How come I didn't get on the news? Why was it just Stain and that heroic beach the only things the people cared about? I can't understand. Izuku almost flinched when he called Ace a beach, but he stopped himself knowing that getting even a little bit closer to him could mean death. I mean, I kill heroes too. But when he does it all of a sudden it's some big thing. You get what I mean, right? So what makes us so different? I can understand him. Shigaraki looked at him. At least a little bit. He does what he does to create a stronger world. He kills heroes who are unworthy, but you just want to kill All Might, and while I'm all down for that to happen. The masses see you as just another manic. There have been countless villains that want to kill All Might and you're just another one. And even if you kill All Might, someone else will just rise up and take his place. Finally getting all that off his chest, Izuku let out a sigh. But then it clicked in his head what he said. He just agreed that killing All Might was a good choice. He slowly turned his gaze upward. And felt horrified by what he saw. Shigaraki had a massive smile on his face. Ah, so that's it. These sheep are smiling not just because of All Might. But every hero out there. That makes so much sense now. If I want to kill All Might, I'll have to kill every single hero before him. How the hell did he get that from what he said? Wow, talking to you was so helpful. You opened my eyes. He said as his finger twitched ever closer to Izuku's neck. The rest of his fingers were squeezing now. Izuku could hardly breathe. Midoriya. The voice of Yaoyorozu came from his left. Izuku's eyes turned in that direction, as did Shigaraki's. Izuku then felt fear that his nightmares might come true. Wait, stay there, everything's fine. Shigaraki then flung his hands into the air, letting go of Izuku. Oh sorry, I didn't know you were here with friends. He got up and took a few steps away, giving Yaoyorozu time to run down and check on Izuku. If you follow me, I'll be forced to get rid of a few people. Shigaraki. Yaoyorozu's eyes widened hearing that this man was the same as the one that attacked her school. Shigaraki stopped walking and gave Izuku a side glance. What do you have planned? Shigaraki pondered this question for a few seconds while looking at the sky. I'm going to rid this world of its peacekeepers. He said before walking away and into the crowd before disappearing. Are you okay? Yaoyorozu asked Izuku right after they lost sight of Shigaraki. Yeah, I just need to catch my breath. She then nodded before pulling out her phone and letting her entire class know what happened. Within minutes they were all around Izuku and Yaoyorozu. One of them called the police. Izuku was sitting in the police station. He had been talking with a detective he met back at the USJ, Detective Tsukachi. He had told the detective all that he could about what happened. Most of the students had gone back home, but Yaoyorozu had stayed behind to make sure Izuku was all right. Izuku walked out of the room Tsukachi had him sitting in. He immediately saw Yaoyorozu and was glad to see her smile. After a few minutes of talking and letting her know he was safe, his mother came in to see him. Izuku was ecstatic to see her. It felt he had been through hell and back since he last saw her. Yaoyorozu looked rather sad. Izuku looked around and didn't see her parents. On that topic, when he was at her house for the study night, he didn't see her parents. From what he could tell, they were quite rich. Are they too busy? The door opened and Izuku saw a butler walk in. Lady Momo. He bowed, placing his hand over his stomach. Thanks for coming, Kaju. Yaoyorozu said, still looking quite down about something. The MSTR is waiting for you. Yaoyorozu's mood seemed to spike. Suddenly she was happy. Is the MSTR her father? Probably. They said their farewells before they both went home. Sorry about that. Shigaraki walked in and faced the other people waiting for him. I had some business to attend to. I hope it was important. A girl with 2 wolf ears and chestnut hair and eyes spoke first. I have realized my conviction. That caught the attention of a man with burn scars covering half of his body. Oh, and pray tell what that is? The scarred man asked. Shigaraki had to hold back his temptation to dust the man for the way he said that. He walked over to the bar and picked up a picture containing a few students of Class 1A. He held it up for all to see. I'm going to destroy the pillars that hold society up. He placed all 5 fingers on the picture, turning it to dust in a second. And I'm going to start where heroes are born. So who wants to watch the world burn down to cinders? Slap. Now on the ground on her knees. Yaoyorozu looked up to see the man who had just slapped her. You encountered a villain and you didn't arrest them. Why do I send you to that school? Her father shouted, rage filling his words. As a Yaoyorozu, it is your job to do better than all those around you, yet you failed the sports festival. Fought a villain in a place where peasants reside and lost. And let another one get away today. I'm sorry. She kept apologizing, knowing it would do nothing to calm his rage. UA is a school for the best of the best, and yet you fail even there. As my daughter, have you no shame for disgracing your family? Family, she hated that term. They used it so much. What even is family? If there was one thing she was sure of. She didn't have any family. Izuku stepped off the plane as it arrived at Island. Beside him was Welf, who had a white cloth on his back. He was carrying a magic sword, as he called them, to show to their tour guide. Due to Izuku winning the sports festival, he was invited to the expo. And was allowed to invite a friend, so after a few others turned him down he ended up inviting Welf. Welf of course was very happy to accept. It had been a good few years since he came here last. The teens looked around for their tour guide. The only thing they knew was that they were holding up a sign with Izuku's name on it. Neither teen could see the person in question. They decided to walk in and look around for a bit before they were shown around. Izuku knew that a few of his friends would be here, but he didn't know where they were. Meanwhile, Izuku was in his first hero costume due to his new one being repaired, much to the annoyance of Welf. Ryu had not held back, or maybe she had and she's just too strong. Welf was wearing a black kimono with a blue shirt underneath it. He had a blue bandana wrapped around his neck. You, there. The winner of the UA Sports Festival. Izuku and Welf looked in the direction of the voice and saw a girl with blonde hair who was slightly taller than Izuku but shorter than Welf. Sorry, I'm late, I had a meeting. The girl took deep breaths in between what she was saying. I'm Melissa Shield. And I'm your tour guide. Both teens were caught off guard by the use of Shield as a name. Is she related to David and Alyssa Shield? Wait, if she's our age then is she their daughter? Izuku stole a glance toward Welf, who was, bowing. What? Is she some kind of royalty in the support industry? Welf then elbowed Izuku as if to try to get him to bow as well. Izuku was about to but stopped when Melissa spoke up. Oh, there's no need to do that. She was blushing, did she not like that kind of attention? Welf raised his head and stood facing the woman. Then it was her turn to be shocked. You're Welf Kratzo, right? Izuku now became even more shocked than he originally was. How did she know who Welf was? Was it because of the sports festival? Wait, the Melissa Shield knows who he is, and he's also friends with Hephaestus. Just who the hell is Welf? Yeah, but just Welf is fine. Oh, I couldn't just refer to someone of your lineage with just your first name. Clearly, Melissa was very versed in Japanese culture as to try to call someone by their last name. No, honestly I prefer people just call me Welf anyway, so it's fine. Welf was trying to be polite, but Izuku could tell it was annoying him. Well, in that case you can just call me Melissa. That okay? Both teens nodded. Well, with that let's be on our way. Welf and Melissa walked off. Izuku just stood there for a few seconds. Was I just ignored? He ran to catch up with them. The two students of UA followed her around as they went from place to place, having a look at a lot of different things. They were currently standing underwater, within the underwater part of Island. Izuku was wearing a piece of equipment that allowed him to see all around him. Hey, Midoriya. The familiar voice of Uraraka entered his earlobes. He pulled the helmet off his head and looked in the direction he heard her and saw Uraraka, Jiro and Yaoyorozu all standing staring at him. Jiro was chuckling at him. You looked ridiculous with that on. She mocked him. Yaoyorozu was just standing silent about something. Her eyes seemed distant. But she noticed someone looking at her and looked back. Then it clicked in her mind. Who was this blonde girl and where had she come from? Yaoyorozu was taken in by the view. Whoever she was, she looked strikingly appealing. Her blue eyes reminded the hero in training of the ocean itself. Her golden hair looks very similar to a certain hero she and Izuku were familiar with. Her figure was the type to die for. Needless to say, Momo was envious. But why was she with Izuku? Were they in that type of relationship? No, why would she think that Izuku wasn't like that, and even if he was, it was none of her business. She didn't even like the boy in that way, right? You're Momo Yaoyorozu. Right? The blonde girl asked, knocking Yaoyorozu right out of her thoughts. She began nodding frantically. I'm Melissa Shield. Nice to meet you. The group of teens made their way to a cafe and sat down before chatting. The girls were sat at one table while Izuku and Welf sat nearby. As they talked, their drinks had arrived. He looked up to thank the waiters but stopped themselves. Standing there was Kaminari and Mineta in formal outfits. Hey! Kaminari said with a smile on his face. What are you two doing here? Jiro questioned. Isn't that obvious? We got jobs here till the expo is over. Mineta said like it was the most obvious thing in the world. No, I meant who in their right mind would hire you two. Jiro flipped it back on the small teen. Do you guys know each other? Yeah, we all go to UA. Welf explained for the non-UA goer. You two are UA students. You shouldn't be slacking at your jobs. Another voice barged into the conversation. They looked to where the voice came from and saw another student from UA speed walking over to them with smoke coming from behind him. Ida had arrived. Kaminari and Mineta were about to make their way back to work but got stopped by Melissa, who invited them to the expo. A goddess. Both teens said in unison. The group, now taking Ida along, made their way through the island. Until they all stopped as they all saw something interesting. There in the middle of a crowd was a stage. Step right up and take the chance of pulling out this legendary weapon. There, standing on the stage already, was another one of their classmates. Todoroki had his hands on what looked like a metal pole sticking out of the stage. He placed his hands on it and tried pulling to no avail. No luck, son of endeavor. The announcer said. Todoroki stepped off stage while eyeing the announcer. Hey, Todoroki. Izuku called out to him, catching the two-toned teen's attention. Melissa apologized about the man named Hermes' mockery. The students stood around and watched as a few other heroes tried their luck with the pole. That's the last thing my mother created before she passed. Melissa said, seemingly out of nowhere. She said it would only react to those who are worthy. She continued. That spear belongs to those with a pure soul. As she said that, the students all watched as one of their teachers stepped up. All Might was about to give it a go. His massive hands wrapped themselves around the grip of the spear. And he gave it a good tug, but it didn't budge. The crowd started going on about how if All Might couldn't pull it, then no one could. Even Melissa seemed a bit confused by the fact All Might had failed. The group was about to just leave it, but then the voice of the announcer brought them back. You there. Winner of the UA Sports Festival. Why don't you try your luck with it? Izuku turned around and was about to turn down the offer. Go. A female voice said in the back of his head. And then his body moved without thinking. Izuku walked on stage. What's your name? Hermes then held out the mic to Izuku. Izukumidoriya. Well, Midoriya, try pulling out the spear. Taking the man up on his offer, Izuku gripped the weapon. As he did, everything went black. He looked around and couldn't see anything anymore. Until long flowing blonde hair entered his vision. My Orion. Her voice echoed through his mind. He felt the warmth of the divine knife on his back. Was it reacting? That warmth then came from the spear in his hands. Then the blue crystals on the ground around the weapon shattered. Izuku fell on his backside. Now holding the spear. He looked at the crowd and saw the looks of shock on all their faces. Well, there you have people. Izukumidoriya was chosen by the spear. Izuku's eyes found his friends, who all looked equally shocked. The woman with long blonde hair had disappeared, and standing where she stood was Melissa. The American girl was in pure shock, definitely a lot more than anyone else here. What was that voice? Izuku asked himself. However, no answer came to him. Hermes handed Izuku a green bit of cloth to wrap around himself and the spear. He did so and walked off the stage and back over to his friends. Upon getting off the stage, a big hand slapped him on the back. "I guess your soul is purer than mine." All Might joked. "No, I wouldn't say that, All Might, maybe he just got lucky," a news reporter said very seriously in spite of All Might joking. "Great job," Welf said while patting Izuku on the back. Melissa on the other hand was freaking out. "We have to go tell my dad right now." She was practically running around in circles. "Hey, hold it," Welf said, cutting Melissa off before she could leave. "The sun is setting, we don't have long before the expo. Izuku'll just take it with him to the expo, we can show it then," he continued. Melissa was tamed like a dog, her head hung low as she walked and made her way back to her dorm. The rest of the group split up until it was just Izuku and Welf heading toward their room. Upon getting into the room, Izuku got out of his hero costume and put on a suit. The suit was mainly black with a white shirt and white blazer under the black jacket. He had a white bow tie that matched the shirt. Black trousers going down to his feet. He had white gloves on as well. "The suit's great." "Thanks, Welf." The entire thing was paid for by Welf as a thank you for the invite. Welf on the other hand was wearing a crimson jacket that matched his hair. It had a white mane for a collar. The jacket was fully open, revealing a pure black button-up shirt. He had gray trousers and black shoes on. The white cloth was draped across, hiding the magic sword he wanted to show to David's shield. Welf noticed the jacket on Izuku was sticking up a little bit. He looked a little closer. "Why were you taking the divine knife?" he asked. Izuku reached around and pulled the weapon from its holster. "I've been carrying it with me since my encounter with Shigaraki in Kiyoshi," the green teen explained. "Oh, makes sense now. You don't want to be caught off guard ever again." Izuku nodded. And with that, he finished tying the spear around his chest. The two set off toward the expo to meet their friends. Welf and Izuku arrived a bit later than the meeting time. Something that, of course, Ida had to reprimand them for. Welf just laughed him off. Waiting with Ida was Todoroki, Kaminari and Mineta. None of the girls were there yet. And then the door behind Izuku swung open. He turned around and his vision was taken. As was 3 of the other boys. Melissa, Uraraka, Jiro and Yaoyorozu had just walked in together. Welf was the first to voice his opinion. "Stunning," he said a little under his breath. For some reason, his gaze lingered on Melissa a lot longer than anyone else's. Izuku, however, his sight was hooked on Yaoyorozu. And her gaze found his. The two made eye contact for a few seconds before Izuku began blushing and looked away. "Well, let's get this party started," Melissa said as she excitedly walked over to the door leading to the expo. She reached for it, but then red lights began flashing on and off, as loud sounds were blaring all around them. "A security breach?" Melissa said as the doors to the building shut with metal barriers falling on the outside. "A break-in has been found. Please return to your rooms," a robotic voice announced for the entire island to hear. "This isn't the protocol for a break-in," Melissa said, having more knowledge on the island than everyone around her. "Something's wrong," Melissa says as Izuku remembers who he saw earlier. "All Might should be at the party. Why else would he be here?" Izuku says as they looked toward the door, which has now been sealed off. Melissa lead them upstairs to above the party in hopes of seeing something. What they saw had them all worried. All Might was standing on a stage, bound. Just from seeing the situation, they all had a pretty good idea of what is happening. The students all made their way to an empty staircase. "So the island is under attack by villains," Mineta said, not calming anyone down. "Yes, and therefore until help arrives we will not be moving from this spot. Is that clear? Ida said, cutting off any hope of trying to be heroes. Yaoyorozu wanted to disagree, but she knew firsthand that she wasn't allowed to act. Even so, we can't just stand here all night doing nothing when people might be in danger. Todoroki shouted back. Uraraka and Jiro were on his side. Izuku was being quiet despite being in Hosu with Ida and Yaoyorozu that night. As he thought, he closed his eyes and looked toward the ground. On one hand, there were people in danger, possibly life-threatening. But on the other, he might not be able to become a hero due to his constant breaking of the laws. Orion. He didn't know which to go for. Be a hero? Or wait for help? Both options had merits to them. Orion. A voice broke him out of his stupor. He looked up and saw the blonde-haired woman from before. He looked around and noticed he was surrounded by darkness. Despite his mental struggle, this woman was smiling. He felt calm while looking. He didn't know who she was in the slightest. My Orion. She said. My name's not Orion. I'm Izukumidoriya. He said, but the woman didn't seem to care. Her features were familiar, but Izuku didn't know where they came from. No, you're definitely Orion. After all, you can wield the spear. Can you not? She was right, he could use it, but how does that change his name? That spear was made to react to a certain person. And you just so happen to be that person. The blonde woman explained. Oh, by the way, my name is Alyssa Shield. Nice to meet you. Wait, you're Melissa's mother? Izuku asked, not quite sure if he heard her right or not. Yep. The blunt way she spoke caught Izuku off guard a little. You should be dead. How are you talking to me? Wow, rude. Of course, I am dead. But the spear is alive. Because it has my soul in it. How the hell can she just say stuff like that without even blinking? But the fact no one else is reacting to her says it all. Her face then turned serious. Orion, I have a request for you. She said, her voice was a lot more commanding now. Izuku gulped down air. Protect my family. Izuku looked at her and could swear her eyes were sad for a second. Leave it to me. As he said that, the darkness around him and her disappeared, pulling Izuku back to reality. His classmates were still arguing about what to do. He took a deep breath before stepping forward. I'm going to save them, all of them. Izuku said, catching everyone's attention. But Midoriya, we can't act, we don't have hero licenses. Ida tried reasoning. But how can we call ourselves heroes if we don't act when no one else can? Isn't that a hero's job? To stand up and face the danger despite fear and reason. Izuku said. That's why I want to be a hero anyway. Even Ida couldn't argue with that. He let out a sigh. This is done if I even smell a hint of danger. With that, the teens set out toward saving an island. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 4. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author ArgonautStrike on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.